If you put your ear to steel in a storm, you can tell the difference between waves and something that's knocking back at you. That's what I tell the new lads on the rig now, when they're green and shaky and hearing things at 3 in the morning. I say it like a joke, and they laugh, but my teeth always feel tight when the wind picks up and the sea starts throwing itself at the legs of the platform. Because the first time I really learned it, I wasn't offshore. I wasn't even on a boat. I was 16, pissed off at the world, walking home through water that shouldn't have been there with my school bag over my head and it tastes like pennies and muck in my mouth. And something in that water stood up and watched me. We'd moved for the sea. That was the stupid part. My dad called it a fresh start. We went from a cramped semi in England with buses outside and takeaways on the corner to this tiny harbor town on the Irish west coast where the whole place smelled like salt and diesel and rotting weed. The first night we got there, the wind drove rain sideways across the quay, and a trawler's mast light swung back and forth in the dark like someone shaking their head at us. I hated it almost on sight. Our house was one of a handful of council places up on the hill, just above the harbor wall. If I leaned out my bedroom window, I could see the river join the sea, a wide, shallow mouth, mud banks and rocks exposed at low tide, gone under at high. Past that, tucked out of view behind a rocky outcrop, was the big concrete lip of the hydro dam they'd built in the 70s. The old village, they said, was still down there under the reservoir. Church spire, cottages, all of it, drowned so people elsewhere could have electricity. Locals talked about it the way you talk about bad weather. Shrug, swear, carry on. Dad got a job maintaining the turbines and spillway gates. Ma'am took shifts at the shop on the square. I got a new uniform, an accent that didn't fit my mouth, and a school full of lads who already knew each other from the day they were born. There's a stereotype that it always rains in Ireland. I can tell you it's not a joke. The air always felt wet. The harbor wall sweated, the timber boats swelled and shrank. Our front step stayed slick with moss no matter how many times Ma'am scrubbed it with bleach. Clothes never dried properly, they just got less damp. After 6 months, I could tell the difference between drizzle, soft day, and what the old fishermen called proper pissing. That last one is what came in November. The depression rolled in off the Atlantic and just sat on us. Gray sky, straight line of water out to the horizon, and rain that hammered at the roof and poured off every gutter like someone was emptying the sea over and over again. The river turned from a lazy brown thing with birds picking at the edges to a fat, fast-moving muscle of water pushing against its banks. The tide piled seawater up against it twice a day. The dam upstream opened one spillway, then another, trying to keep the reservoir from climbing to the lip. Everything gurgled. The drains, the culverts under the road, the pipes in the walls. The whole town sounded like it was breathing water. The day it happened, I'd had a shit day at school. Half the lads still called me English instead of using my name. Half the teachers acted like I was expected to be grateful just to sit in the classroom. Football got canceled because the pitch had flooded. Lunchtime, someone thought it'd be hilarious to push my bag into a puddle. By the time the last bell went, I just wanted to go home, lock my door, and lose myself in crap TV and whatever cheap biscuits Ma'am had bought. The school sat on the drier side of town, up near the church and the ruined abbey on the hill. To get home, I'd usually cut down Killy Lane past the old boathouse and then along the harbor road that skirted the quay. 10 minutes if I walked slow. You could hear the masts clinking and the slap of water against the stone wall as you went, smell the river mixing with the salt. That afternoon, though, I knew something was off the second I stepped outside. The sound of the river was wrong. Louder, closer. That constant background whoosh had turned into a roar, like we'd moved 10 miles nearer to the dam. I pulled my blazer over my head and started down towards the square, trainers slapping on the wet tarmac. Rain slapped back. It bounced off the puddles, ran in sheets down the hill, turned the gutters into tiny streams full of old leaves and fag ends. Halfway to the harbor road, I saw people standing where no one ever stood. There was a knot of them down by the turn, right where Killy Lane met the quay. A few in high-vis jackets, a few in wool jumpers and flat caps, umbrellas fighting the wind, all of them clustered like they were watching a fight. I swore under my breath, shifted my bag on my shoulder, and pushed down towards them. "What's the story?" I asked, shoving myself into a gap between two women from Mam's shop. The smell of wet wool and cheap perfume fought with diesel and river stink. Nobody answered at first. Everyone's eyes were on the same thing. The harbor road was gone. From the corner where the quay started, all the way along to where the road bent round the headland towards my estate, there was nothing but water. The sea and the river and the sky had all decided they were the same thing. Dirty brown-gray waves slapped at the stone wall and spilled over onto the tarmac. In a low bit near the slipway, the road disappeared entirely under a churning expanse that ran right across to the base of the hill on the far side. Street lamps stuck up out of it like drowned matchsticks. A bin bobbed and spun, trapped against the wall. Every now and then something larger, maybe a pallet, maybe a fence panel, would heave up out of the water, roll, and vanish again. I could taste the metal in the air just standing there. Rust, salt, that sour, rotting smell you get when the river throws up months of mud all at once. "Jesus," someone whispered. Rising still, another voice said, "They'll have to open the third gate. The third gate's knackered, they can't." That was an older man in oilskins and a watch cap, face like old rope. One of the skippers. "They'll fucking have to." I didn't care about gates. All I cared about was that my house was over there, past the bend, and this was usually the fastest way. "What's happening?" I tried again. "Can we not just walk around the top road?" One of the high-vis jackets turned. It was Garda O'Reilly, the local policeman, his peaked cap shoved back, uniform jacket dark with rain. "Roads closed both sides," he said. "Flooded past the headland, flooded at the back road by the marsh." "You going up home?" "Yeah," I said. "Hillview Crescent." He grunted. "You'll have to wait. Tractors coming to ferry people round. One or two at a time." He nodded towards the far side of the square, and I saw it then. A big green Massey Ferguson with its running lights on, parked up behind the pub, a trailer hitched on the back. A couple of lads in yellow jackets were hauling life jackets out of the trailer, swearing and dropping them in the mud as they tried to untangle straps. My shoulders sagged. "How long?" I asked. "O'Reilly shujajid. As long as it takes, lad. You're not drowning for the sake of a bit of telly, yeah?" He'd read me too easily. I felt my ears burn. "I'm not gonna drown," I muttered. "It's just fucking water." "Watch your mouth," he snapped, more out of habit than heat. "Back up with the others. We'll get you across." People were already queuing, shuffling back and forth, staring at the water like it might leap up and have a go. The tractor driver was arguing with a man in a wax jacket about how many people he'd take in one go. "Two at a time," he kept saying. "I've a wife and kids. I'm not sinking the bastard for ye." I stood there for maybe a minute. The rain ran down inside my collar, cold fingers along my spine. My socks were already squelching in my trainers. Every breath tasted like river, and something in me just rebelled. It was that teenage rage that doesn't have a target. The part that hated my dad for dragging us here, and hated Mam for going along with it, and hated the lads at school for laughing at my accent, and hated the fucking sky for never being blue. The idea of standing in that line for an hour, inching forward while people whinged about the council and the dam and climate change. No fucking way. My eyes drifted away from the queue, looking for another way. If I went back up past the church and cut across, there was the upper road that looped behind the estate and came out near the reservoir. That road ran over a small stone bridge that crossed one of the tributaries feeding the main river. I'd cycled that way once or twice when I'd stayed after school and missed the usual bus crowd. It took longer, but it ended up at the same hill. And it was higher ground, less likely to be under 3 feet of brown soup. I pictured the hill, our estate, my front door. 5 minutes of walking uphill versus God knows how long standing here, listening to people argue about which farmer had the best tractor. "Fuck this," I said under my breath. I stepped out of the crowd before my brain could argue. "Hey, where are you going?" Mam's friend called after me. I pretended not to hear her. My school bag thumped against my spine as I jogged up the hill, away from the roar of the river. The further up I went, the more the sound shifted. The big rushing undertone faded and the hiss of rain on rooftops took over, the occasional car sweeping past with tires hissing on wet tarmac. The town shrank behind me. The harbor, the square, the people, all wrapped back up in gray. I cut across by the church, its stone walls streaked dark, the graveyard sodden and shiny. Even the dead here had wet feet. Past that, onto the upper road, which curved inland, away from the sea and towards the reservoir where the drowned village slept. If I listened hard through the rain, I could hear the faint mechanical rumble of the dam in the distance. Not loud, just a constant grinding, a hum under the bones of the hill, like something huge under the surface breathing in a slow, careful way. The road wasn't flooded. Not here, not yet. Water ran in sheets off the fields, gathered in the ditches. Small streams crossed the tarmac and disappeared into culverts that gurgled under the road, bursting out of rusted grates on the other side. The smell changed too. Less salt, more earth and peat, and that sharp metallic hint that always comes when ground that hasn't seen air in a long time suddenly gets dug up. Ivalkid fast. My blazer was plastered to my back, my hair stuck to my forehead, but I kept my eyes on the tarmac and the way it curved ahead. In my head, I was mapping it. Bridge, then the long straight with the hawthorn hedge, then the corner with the big ash tree on the bank, then the turn down towards Hillview. The bridge came into view just where I remembered it. Small, old, a stone arch, its parapets crusted in moss and lichen. Below it, a narrow cut where one of the river's tributaries normally flowed. A brown trickle on a normal day, a swirling rush now. Except I wasn't the only one who'd thought of this route. The first thing I saw was the cones. Bright orange, lined up sloppily across the road just before the bridge. Someone had dragged an old road closed sign out too, the reflective panel flashing dully in the gray light. A man stood in front of them, head down against the rain. Yellow waterproof jacket, peaked cap. I knew the shape even before he lifted his face. Garda O'Reilly again. He must have moved faster than I had. Oh, for fuck's sake, I muttered. He saw me as I slowed, his expression already switching to the weary authority adults get when they recognize a repeat offender. Turn around, lad. He called over the noise of the rain and the churning water under the bridge. She's closed. I just need to get home, I said. My voice sounded whiny even to me. I live up on the hill. I'm not going to the harbor. Doesn't matter where you're going, he said. He pointed with his chin past the parapet. River's outer banks all along there. Fields are gone. Whole lower stretch is under. You'll walk out there, you'll go off the road, and no one will see you again till you end up in fucking Galway Bay. You probably thought that sounded funny. It didn't. It's not that bad, I said. Up by the estate, it'll be fine. Do you know that? He snapped. Do you? Have you been there to check? He spread his arms. You can't see it from here. What you can see is a road that's closed. So, back you go. Queue up like everyone else. The river roared under the arch, sending spray up through the gaps in the stones, tiny cold kisses against my shins. I looked past him over the bridge. The road beyond dipped slightly, then leveled out, cut between fields that were already pooling with water. I couldn't see far. Gray curtains of rain blurred everything into the same washed-out color. My fingers clenched on the strap of my bag. I've almost no battery, I said. If I go back down, my mom's going to be worried sick. He cut me off with a hand. I don't care about your phone, he said. You go back down that hill, you tell them at the tractor you just try to sneak around, and you get in the queue. I'll be along when I can. Now, go on. He wasn't angry. That was the worst part. If he'd shouted, I could have shouted back or at least had something to push against. But he just looked tired, rain running off the peak of his cap, jacket dark with wet, eyes already sliding past me like I was just another problem to keep alive until his shift ended. Behind me, tires hissed. A vehicle pulled up at the T-junction where the upper road, met the track down towards the dam. It was an old Land Rover, the boxy kind, the color of mud and algae. A collie's head poked out of the passenger window, tongue lolling, eyes bright. Behind the wheel, a man in a flat cap lifted a hand in greeting. "Evening, Mick," he called to O'Reilly over the sound of the rain. "Evie got some job on ye there." "Evening, Tom," O'Reilly called back. He glanced at me. "Don't move. I'm not finished with ye." Then he stepped away from the cones and walked towards the driver's window. The collie stuck its nose out further, sniffing, steam puffing from its breath. The farmer leaned in towards the guard, both of them bending their heads so the rain hit their necks instead of their faces. Their voices merged into the weather, just fragments reaching me. Fields like a lake. Never seen the dam like it. Steer clear of the lower road. I stood there, dripping, hands tied on my bag strap, heart thumping with a mix of frustration and that strange, fizzing excitement you get when you know you're about to do something stupid. He'd said don't move, but the cones were there, the sign was there. It wasn't like he was guarding a nuclear plant. It was just a bridge. I looked at him, back turned, deep in conversation with the farmer. I looked at the cones, bright hunks of plastic and spray. I looked at the bridge, slick stone, low parapet, water roaring beneath. 3 steps and I'd be over. If I got caught, I'd get a bullocking. Maybe ma'am will be told. Maybe I'd be grounded for a week. But all that was in the future. Right now, all I could feel was the wet and the cold and the burning need not to be told what to do one more fucking time that day. I took a breath, adjusted my grip on my bag, and moved. I slipped between 2 cones, the reflective tape brushing my blazer. My trainers hit the first slab of the bridge, and the sound changed. Less splash, more hollow thud, stone underfoot instead of tarmac. The water rushing under the arch was loud enough to fill my ears, but I still heard my own heartbeat, fast and light. I kept my head down like that made me invisible and walked as quickly and quietly as I could. The parapet came up to my hip. I resisted the urge to look over. The bridge arched beneath me, round belly of stone, then started to slope downwards again. I risked a glance back as I reached the crown. O'Reilly's back was still turned. The rain and the engine noise swallowed my footsteps. The collie's ears twitched, but it kept watching its owner, loyal and blind to me. I grinned just for a second. Stupid, triumphant grin. The kind you get when you know you've just got one over on an adult whose job is not letting you. Then I hit the downslope and the world changed. On the far side of the bridge, the road was gone. The tarmac ran a few meters past the end of the parapet, then dipped gently down into what should have been the low stretch between 2 hedges. I'd walked it before. You barely noticed the dip in dry weather. Today, the dip was a basin, and the basin was full. Brown water stretched out in front of me all the way to the line of trees that marked the edge of the marsh. It wasn't a puddle. It wasn't a big puddle. It was a long, curving, road-shaped lake. Fence posts stuck up through it at intervals, their lower halves hidden. The tops of hedges were visible here and there, dark green lines under the surface like someone had painted them in the wrong layer. Rain pocked the flood, each drop leaving a tiny ring that was gone before you could see it properly. The surface itself wasn't still. There was a slight current, the whole thing moving left to right, the way the river would have been running under normal circumstances. Somewhere under there, I knew, tarmac and white lines and drains and ditches were all still there, just erased. I stood dead still at the foot of the bridge, staring. The river smelled stronger here. Not the open salt of the harbor, but something damper, older. Mud, root, the sharp tang of slurry from farmers' fields. Under it all was that metallic note again, stronger now, enough that I could taste it, like sucking on a coin. I could have turned back. That's the thing that gets me, even now. In some other timeline I sighed, said fair enough, and trudged back over the bridge to queue for the tractor. Maybe I never saw what I saw. Maybe I grew up thinking floods were just an inconvenience, and the worst that could happen was damp socks. In this one, I tightened my grip on my bag, looked at that long stretch of water, calculated how long it would take to walk through it, and said out loud, fuck it. The flood started about mid-shin deep. The first step off the tarmac was like stepping into an ice bath. Water surged into my trainers, up my socks, straight through the bone. The cold was wrong for November. It felt more like early spring, that kind of cold that hasn't had a chance to remember what the sun is. I hissed through my teeth and took another step. Mud squelched under my sole. Something grass, maybe brushed my ankle. Jesus Christ, I muttered. The noise of the water changed again the second I was in it. Sound got muffled like my ears had cotton in them. The rain on the surface became louder, a constant patter right at head height. I could still hear the roar of the main river somewhere off to the right and the deeper grinding hum of the dam, but they felt further away, like I'd stepped into another room. I kept walking. Shin deep became knee deep quicker than I'd expected. The bottom wasn't flat. Invisible dips swallowed my feet. Once my toe hit the edge of something hard and uneven, I guessed a submerged curb, and I lurched, windmilling my arms to keep my balance. My bag thumped against my shoulder. I didn't fall, but the water slopped up against my thighs, soaking my trousers completely. Shit, I gasped. My breath fogged in front of me. I glanced back at the bridge. From where I was, maybe 5 meters out, I could see the arch and the cones. O'Reilly and the Land Rover were still there, but they were just shapes now, blurred gray figures against the gray road. The farmer's collie had its front paws up on the door, looking excited about something. I couldn't tell if that something was me. I turned back and kept going. Another couple of steps, and I was waist deep. At that point, I hoisted my bag up over my head, one strap looped around my wrist, the other hanging down my back. It wasn't that I cared that much about my books. I just knew Dad would snap if my phone got ruined, and Ma'am would go quiet in that way that meant harder words later if the uniform didn't dry properly. Every movement sent little waves outwards, disrupting the surface in rings. Rain stabbed into them, turning each ring into a mess of shattered shapes. I couldn't see my legs under the water. It was just brown and thick and full of specks, bits of leaf, stems, little torn pieces of something pale that might have been polystyrene or might have been bone. The cold started to work its way in properly then, not just on my skin, but deeper into muscles and joints. My thighs began to ache, a deep, slow burn. My fingers on the bag strap felt stiff. I try not to think about what I was actually walking through. Out here, away from the town, the floodwater wasn't just river water. It was everything that had been on the fields and in the ditches and in the septic tanks. Pig shit, cow shit, fertilizer, spilled diesel, dead rats. All of it washed up into one big, lovely bath. Just don't fall, I told myself. You don't fall, you don't drink any of it. You get home, hot shower, job done. The land on either side of the road had blurred into flat, sucking sameness. I couldn't see where field ended and ditch began. Fence posts marched out into the water, most of them leaning at odd angles. In the distance, through the curtain of rain, I thought I could just about see the top of the big ash tree on the bend. It looked smaller somehow, further away than it should be. 20 minutes, I muttered. You've walked this 100 times. It doesn't fucking change just because it's wet. The water kept rising. By the time it hit the bottom of my ribs, each step was a slog. I had to lean slightly forward, pushing against the drag on my legs. The current wasn't strong enough to knock me off my feet, but it wasn't nothing either. It pressed against my shins and knees, stroking the fine hairs there, shapeless hands. My school tie floated up, bobbing against my chin. I spat river taste off my lips. That was when I first heard it. At least, that was when I first realized I was hearing it. It wasn't the dam. That low, constant grind was still there under everything else. It wasn't the roar of the flood or the hiss of the rain. It was sharper, more intermittent. A hollow sound like something knocking on wood. 3 beats, pause. 3 beats, pause. Faint at first. So faint I thought it might be my heart banging in my ears. I stopped walking. Water lapped against my stomach, little waves radiating out from my body. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. It seemed to come from somewhere under the surface. Not directly beneath me, but not far away either. A little to my left, maybe, or my right. Sound carries weird over water. I turned my head, listening. For a moment, all I could hear was my own breathing and the rain. Then, knock, knock, knock. Definitely there. Definitely real. Hello. I called, feeling stupid as soon as the word left my mouth. The sound stopped. I stood there, shivering, bag above my head, looking at the rippling brown surface. There was nothing, just a bit of broken branch spinning slowly, caught in an eddy. Probably a fence, I muttered. Maybe some old bit of gate slamming against a post under the water with the current. That made sense. That was sensible. Except there aren't many knock, knock, knock fences. My legs were starting to tremble from holding still against the current. I forced myself to move again. The knocking didn't start up right away. For a few minutes, it was just me and the rain, the rush of water, the smell of mud. My teeth started to chatter. I tried to clamp them shut, but that just made my jaw hurt. I thought about turning back more than once. But every time I glanced over my shoulder, the bridge looked smaller. Further away. Between there and here the water looked deeper, darker, like it'd be harder to walk back uphill against whatever sluggish flow pulled at my trousers. Ahead of me, still a long way off, but there was the ash tree. It was a familiar marker, a big dark shape on the left side of the road with a bit of graffiti carved into the bark at kid height. I'd scrawled my initials there once, half a lifetime ago, or 6 months, same thing. If I could get there, I know exactly how far I had left. A straight shot to the hill, then up, then home. Just get to the tree, I told myself. Then decide. I slogged on. The water reached my chest. My blazer was a dead weight dragging at my shoulders. I thought about shrugging it off, but I didn't want to try to wrestle out of sleeves with my hands full and risk tangling myself under. Instead, I hunched into it and tried to pretend it was armor. My bag strapped it into my fingers. They'd gone pale and wrinkled. Skin puffed from being wet too long. Somewhere in the back of my head, Dad's voice lectured about hypothermia. Shivering is good. Shivering means your body's still trying. When you stop shivering, you worry. I was shivering plenty. The knock came again. This time it was closer, or louder, or I just admitted to myself it wasn't in my head. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. I kept walking. Each step was a little slower now, like the water was learning how to hold me. I tried to angle my ears like a dog to work out where it was coming from. Left side. No, right? No, behind. I risked a quick look over my shoulder. The bridge was a smear now. The cones were little orange smudges on a gray arc. I couldn't see O'Reilly or the Land Rover at all. Just water between here and there. For a second, I had this awful, gut-deep feeling that the second I'd stepped off the far side of that bridge, I'd gone somewhere else entirely. That if I tried to go back now, the bridge wouldn't be there. Just more water, more fence posts, more gray. Stop it, I whispered. Just stop. The knocking stopped again, as if it had heard me. The ash tree grew, slowly, through the curtain of rain. Talking about strange. Each step felt like a minute. My breath came in little clouds. My world shrank to the bit of water in front of me. The weight on my shoulders, the cold in my bones, and the distant, blurry goal of that tree. At some point, God knows how long after the first knock, I felt something brush my leg. Not a bit of grass, not a stick, something solid, something that slid along my shin and then bumped against my calf before drifting away. I yelped, high and ridiculous, and jerked my knee up, almost losing my balance. A wave slapped in my face. I got a mouthful of flood, choked, spat, coughed, my chest burning. It tasted like the world's worst cocktail, mud and petrol and shit, and something old and sour underneath that. It got up my nose and into the back of my throat, and I gagged until my stomach cramped. My bag wobbled above my head. I clutched it tighter, squeezing my eyes shut for a second, then forced them open again. What the fuck was that? I rasped. The surface was already smoothing itself out, my disturbance washing away. A swirl of darker brown marked where something had been. A moment later, even that was gone. It could have been anything. A branch, floating fence wire, some bit of rubbish. Or a hand. Tree, I told myself hoarsely. get to the tree. I don't know how long it took. Long enough that my arms hurt from holding the bag up. Long enough that my teeth hurt from clenching. Long enough that when I finally looked up properly, expecting it to still be far away, the ash tree was right there, to my left, its trunk vanishing into the brown water half a meter from where the road should have been. Relief hit me so hard I almost sobbed. I'd walked this bit 100 times in my head. From the ash tree, it was 5 minutes to the turnoff, even at a slow pace. Flood or no flood, I was close now. I wasn't going to die out here in a fucking school tie. That's when the other feeling arrived. If fear of drowning is like a hand around your throat, this was more like someone walking into the room behind you without making a sound. Every hair on my arms lifted. My scalp prickled under my soaked hair. My chest felt tight, not from lack of air, but from something pressing in. I stopped again, not because I wanted to, but because my body did it for me. The knocking started up immediately. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. It was right behind me. I didn't want to turn. I remember that as clearly as the cold. Some deep bit of my brain had already decided that whatever was there behind me in that brown, churning, rain-pocked water did not want to be looked at. That if I could just pretend it wasn't there and keep moving, I might get away with it. But there's another part of your brain, older maybe, that insists on hunting out threats, on locating them, on making you turn your head and look, even when looking is the last thing in the world you want to do. I don't know which of those parts won. Maybe both. Because it felt like someone else reached up and twisted my shoulders for me, slow and careful, so as not to upset the water too much. I turned. The school bag strap creaked in my hand. Rain stung my eyes, ran down my face, turned the world into streaks. At first, all I saw was the road-shaped river I'd already walked, the long, curving cut between drowning hedges and half-swallowed fence posts. The bridge was gone into the rain. The fields were thin, gray smudges. Then my eyes adjusted, picked out shapes on the surface, and I saw him. He was standing in the middle of the flooded road, maybe 30 meters back. Distance is funny in flat ground with no proper markers, but he was far enough away that I couldn't make out the details of his face, and close enough that he felt too close. He wasn't swimming. He wasn't bobbing like the bin had by the harbor. He was just standing there, upright, like the water only came to his waist, even though it was up to my chest here. His hair was plastered to his head, that much I could see. A flat, wet cap of hair, color indeterminate in the murk, somewhere between dark blonde and light brown. He wore a coat, black or dark blue, heavy-looking, long enough that under normal circumstances it might have brushed his knees. In the flood, it floated out a little around him, rippling at the surface as if it were puffed up from beneath. I stared at him. He stared back. That was my first real thought. He's looking straight at me. Then my eyes snagged on the sleeves of his coat and wouldn't move. His right arm was under the water. I couldn't see his hand, but the sleeve was down, cuff submerged, shoulder wet. Normal. Fine. The way someone would stand if you told them to stand in a lake and look menacing. The left sleeve was wrong. For a second, I thought it was just pushed up. Then I realized it wasn't there at all. The sleeve stopped abruptly a few inches below the shoulder and was tied off in a knot. The fabric was bunched, swollen more than it should have been. The actual shoulder of the coat on that side drooped oddly, like there was nothing underneath to hold it up. My brain tried to fill in the biology. He's missing an arm, I thought. Accident. Maybe he lost it in a winch, in some farm machinery, at the dock with a mooring rope. That happens. People lose arms. People tie their sleeves. The thoughts ran well ahead of the part of me that was actually taking him in, because the rest of him was wrong too. He looked heavy at first glance, broad-shouldered, thick through the middle. One of those lads who works outside and eats full Irish breakfasts and drinks pints and carries it all in a solid planted way. But the longer I looked, the less he looked heavy and the more he looked swollen. His face, what I could see of it, was pale. Not just cold pale, but waxy. His cheeks bulged slightly, skin stretched. His lips looked too thick. Even at that distance, I had the impression of them sitting wrong on his teeth. His coat, where it clung to him instead of floating out, bulged in places. At the chest, at the gut, at the thighs under the water. Not like muscles. Like someone had pumped him full of fluid until his skin couldn't decide whether to explode or hold. He looked like the pictures they showed us in biology class once. Drowning victims. Blurred faces swollen by time underwater. Except he wasn't lying on a slab in a textbook. He was upright, standing in moving floodwater, rain pattering on his head, staring straight across the distance at me. The knocking came again. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't from under the water anymore. It was clear now where it came from. His right arm, down in the water, moved with each knock, not in a swinging motion, but in this horrible, slow, piston-like rhythm. I couldn't see his hand, couldn't see what he was hitting against, but with every knock his shoulder rose a fraction and dropped again, the water around his waist twitching in time. His left side stayed completely still. The tied-off sleeve, the drooping shoulder, the empty space where an arm should have been, none of it moved. It just hung there, wrong and dead, and somehow heavier than the rest of him. I don't know how long we stood like that, me half-turned in chest-deep water, bag above my head, him out there in the drowned road, knocking at something under the surface with his one hidden hand. It can't have been more than a few seconds. 10, 20 tops. It felt like a full minute, a full hour, a full lifetime stretched thin across the surface of the flood. My whole body screamed to turn back around and run. My legs throbbed with cold, with effort, with the weight of the water. My arms shook so hard I could hear the rustle of my bag straps. My heart hammered against my ribs, every beat a dull thud in my ears. And somewhere under all that, a quieter thought slid through like an eel. I know him. Not his name, not his job, just some deep, wrong familiarity. The way you feel when a face from a nightmare turns up in a crowd and looks exactly the same as it did when you woke up shaking. I'd never seen him before. I'm sure of that. But the moment our eyes met across that brown, shifting water, my brain whispered, "You're late." I don't know why that was the thought that came. Not who are you or what the fuck or any of the sensible things. Just, "You're late." Like I was the one who was supposed to be there, not him. The flood shifted around my ribs. The rain hammered my scalp. He didn't move. Not his feet, not his head, not that knotted, empty sleeve. Only the hidden arm deep under the waterline, knocking. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. I think that's what broke me. Something about that tidy little rhythm in all that chaos. Like he hadn't just ended up there with the rest of the shit the river had dragged out. Like he brought his own rules with him. My body took over. It decided, very reasonably, that I was going to die if I stood there any longer trying to figure it out. I spun back around so fast my bag almost slipped from my fingers. Water sloshed up against my chest, my chin. I ducked my head to keep the bag up, and I started to move. It wasn't running. You can't run through water your ribs. It was this ugly, stumbling, dragging half swim, half walk. Every step felt wrong. I couldn't feel my feet. My legs were just heavy things that sometimes found purchase on something solid and sometimes didn't. The current shoved at my knees like it was trying to twist me back around. Behind me, the knocking didn't speed up. It didn't get angry or frantic. It just kept going. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. If he'd splashed after me, I might have coped better. That's the fucked up part. Something you can see coming, you can deal with. You can scream or fight it or go under trying. But that steady tapping just stayed where it was, or sounded like it did, following me without moving. I didn't look back again. I couldn't. I knew in my bones that if I saw him a second time, closer, I'd never get my legs to work at all. The ash tree slipped past on my left. Its lower branches brushed the water, leaves dripping. I meant to look at the carving I'd made as a kid, find the mark that meant home wasn't far. Instead, my eyes kept flicking to the surface right by my hands, waiting for pale fingers to break it. My breath came in cold, sharp gulps. Each inhale tasted like rust and muck. My chest was tight, Not from exertion now, but from that thick, pressing sense that the air itself didn't want me. Like the flood had reached up higher than my skin. The thing about being scared in water is you can't flail properly. You can't throw your arms around or stamp your feet. Everything has to be controlled or you go under. So all that panic energy has nowhere to go. It just boils inside you. That's what that last 100 meters felt like. Boiling and freezing at the same time. The depth didn't get any higher, thank God. If anything, it started to drop millimeter by millimeter. The water line crept down my ribs to my stomach, my thighs, my knees. The second my feet hit something that felt like a raised edge, a submerged curb, a culvert lip, whatever, I could have cried with relief. The drag eased off just a bit. I still had to push, but my legs remembered how to walk. Knock, knock, knock. Fainter now. Or maybe drowned out by the sound of my own blood in my ears. It didn't matter. It was still there. Like the river had a heartbeat, and I'd tuned myself to it and couldn't untune again. The flood narrowed around me as the road climbed. The hedges on either side reappeared, first as vague green shapes under the surface, then as actual plants, dripping and flattened but above water. A gatepost stuck up on the right. I passed it, sucking in deep, shuddering breaths. I measured progress in stupid things. That gatepost, a telegraph pole, the place where the ditch usually overflowed in winter. Little markers that meant nothing to anyone else, but to me, right then, were life. There's a point on that road where it straightens and you can see the hill properly. Our estate sat on the slope like someone had stuck a Lego set on the side of a bog. Rows of identical houses, all pebble-dashed and damp, with washing lines that never saw dry clothes. When the roofs finally showed through the rain, my legs almost buckled. The flood tapered out quicker after that. 1 minute, I was mid-thigh. The next, it was only up to my shins, then my ankles. Mud replaced water underfoot. My trainers made this disgusting sucking sound every time I lifted my feet, full of cold soup. I stumbled onto proper tarmac like a man crawling onto a beach. I made myself walk another 10 steps before I dared stop or look back. When I did, the flood sat there behind me, thick and flat and brown, filling up the dip in the land like it had always belonged there. The surface was almost weirdly smooth now. The rain still pocked it, but there were no ripples, no signs of anyone standing there. I looked for him. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. My eyes went straight to the place I thought he'd been, roughly in line with the ash tree, slightly off-center in the drowned road. I scanned left, right, squinted through the gray. Nothing. You'd think I'd feel relieved. No sign of him, no bloated coat, no knotted sleeve. Just water and rain and fence posts, and that faint, steady, grinding hum from the dam. Instead, my stomach turned over, because the knocking hadn't stopped. It was hard to hear from here, but it was there if I really listened. That hollow, 3-beat tap, coming from nowhere in particular. Not louder in front and behind, not left or right, just in the water. I didn't stand there long. Everything hurt. My skin was raw. My fingers were starting to go that numb where you know you're gonna have trouble with buttons later. My teeth chattered so hard I bit the inside of my cheek. I turned away from the flood and started up the hill. The incline made my thighs scream, but I was on solid ground now, the road shining with a simple layer of rain instead of trying to steal my feet. Houses grew out of the murk, their windows yellow blobs where people had lights on already, curtains half drawn. By the time I reached our street, I was sobbing without realizing it. Not big, dramatic sobs, just these horrible, hitching breaths I couldn't control, tears slipping hot down my cold face and getting washed away immediately. Our front garden was a rectangle of waterlogged grass bounded by a low wall. The gate hung open. I squelched through up to 3 steps, slick, always slick, and grabbed the door handle. It slipped right out of my fingers. They were too numb. I got purchased the second time, yanked the door open, and stumbled inside. Warmth hit me like a punch. Not real warmth. You never got that in that house, not with the crap insulation and Dad's obsession with saving on leche, but enough of a difference that my skin noticed. Jesus, Mary, and Joseph. Mam's voice came from the tiny hallway. "Look at the state of ye. Jack, love, what happened?" She appeared in front of me, hands on my arms, pressing, patting, pulling my bag away. Her own hair was damp. She must have been at the shop until just before. The faint smell of frying onions and wet dog hung in the air. I started. My throat closed up. Behind her, the TV in the sitting room was on. News presenter's voice, serious, talking about record rainfall and emergency response. I could see footage over her shoulder of the harbor road underwater, tractor inching along with people in yellow jackets clinging to the sides. "You're soaked," she said. "Were you not at the school?" "They're ferrying the kids over with Murphy's tractor," I thought. I went the back way. I managed. My voice sounded thin, reedy in my own ears. "Bridge." Mam's eyes flashed. "You did what?" she snapped. "That road's closed." I heard them say it on the radio. "There's a guard up there. He was talking to someone," I said. The words came out before I could edit them. I wanted to get home. Mam closed her eyes for a second, like she was counting. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice had steel in it. "You could have been swept away," she said. "Do you know that? We'd never have found you in that muck. Your father's at the dam. He's worried sick about the levels. And you, Jesus, Jack, I am sorry," he whispered. She huffed, a sound halfway between a laugh and a sob, and pulled me into the hall properly, shutting the door behind me. Water dripped onto the lino, dark spots on yellowing pattern. "Right," she said, switching into that brisk mode that means she's terrified. "Shoes off, clothes off, straight into the shower. Hot as you can stand it. I'll get you a towel, then soup, then we'll have words." Her fingers fumbled at my tie, my blazer buttons. Mine felt useless. I couldn't tell where my own skin ended and the wet fabric began. She tutayed, peeled my sleeves off my wrists, shook her head at the weight of the soaked jumper. I wanted to tell her. I did. The words built up in my chest like trapped air. "There's someone in the flood. There's a man in the water. He's missing an arm, and he looks like he's been dead a week, and he's standing where he shouldn't be standing." But they stuck, because as soon as I pictured her face hearing it, going from anger to worry to that soft, strained look she got when she thought I was losing it, I shut my mouth. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd been in the water too long, breathing that muck, and my brain had burped up a hallucination just to mess with me. Maybe if I said it out loud, it'd be real in a way it hadn't been a minute before. "Jack," Mam said, knuckles on my cheek. "You with me?" "Yeah," I lied. "Just cold." She nodded, satisfied enough, and shoved me towards the bathroom. I left little slaps of water behind on the lino with every step. The bathroom was a narrow rectangle with black mold creeping round the window frame and a constant film of condensation on the mirror. The radiator under the towel rail ticked as it tried to do something against the damp. I stripped, every piece of clothing peeling away reluctantly, heavy as though it had grown into me. When I finally got under the shower, the first blast of hot water hurt. My skin burned, all those little blood vessels opening up after being squeezed almost shut. I gripped my teeth and let it happen. The water ran brown for a few seconds as mud swirled off my legs and down the drain. Under the roar of the shower, I heard another sound, faint and irregular. Knock, knock, knock. I froze, shampoo halfway to my hair. It came again, a little louder. Not from the door, not from the floor, from the pipes. The wall vibrated under my fingertips. The knocking was right there, transmitted through copper and tile, as intimate as someone putting their mouth to your ear. Air in the pipes, I told myself. Dad said, when it's been raining, the system, the pressure. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. I lathered my hair fast, got soap in my eyes, hissed, rinsed. Every second I stayed under that water, I half expected a pale hand to come twisting out of the shower head. I was out and wrapped in a towel faster than I've ever moved in my life. That night, I lay in bed with the sound of rain on the window and the river down in the harbor, a constant roar in the distance. Mam had gone quiet after giving me hell. Dad still wasn't home. He'd called once to say he'd be at the dam all night, that they were doing rolling releases, that nobody was to go near the lower roads if they could help it. "You should have seen it," he said over the crackle of bad reception. "Extra gates open for the first time in decades. Whole village will be spinning in its grave." I thought about the drowned church, the half-rotten pews, the old pub submerged under meters of cold green water. I thought about how all that had to go somewhere when they let the gates open, about how the flood I'd trudged through that afternoon wasn't just rain, but years of lake. And I thought about the man standing in it with his knotted sleeve and his bulging cheeks and his steady, patient knock. I didn't sleep much. When I did drift off, I dreamed of being under the water, below the road, looking up. The sky was a dull, gray cheesecloth, the underside of the rain-featured surface. The road was a darker line above that. Between them, something hung, swollen and pale, reaching down with one arm towards me like he was offering to pull me up. I woke with my own hand stretched above my face, fingers spread, reaching for the dark. I didn't tell anyone. Kids at school bragged about the flood, about being ferried in the tractor, about seeing a pallet smash into the quay wall, about the way Mr. Kelly's car had been half submerged and full of river muck, and he'd had to push it out himself, swearing the whole time. They compared sticking out bits of measurement, how deep it had been on which road, whose back garden had turned into a pond. I listened, shoved my hands in my pockets, nodded in the right places. Once, I considered asking if any of them had seen a man out there. A fisherman, maybe, or a farmer who'd gotten stuck. I imagined the way the question would sound. "Did you see a bloke in the flood? One arm? Looked like somebody left him in a bath too long." I kept my mouth shut. The water went down. The tractor stopped running. Life went back to normal, which in that town meant damp and mildly miserable with the occasional gust of laughter. Then, 3 weeks later, a body turned up at the dam. I remember the way Dad looked when he came home that night. He wasn't supposed to be off until morning, but he walked in at 9, jacket half zipped, hair flattened from his hard hat. He smelled like wet concrete and turbine oil. Ma'am was wiping the condensation off the kitchen window with a tea towel. She turned when the door opened. "You're home early," she said. "They sorted." Dad shrugged out his jacket and hung it on the peg. His fingers trembled. "You make me a tea?" he said. I'll tell ye in a minute." That got my attention. My old man wasn't the type to come home shaken. Pissed off, yeah. Tired, sure. But this was different. There was a stiffness to his movements, like every muscle in him had its own cramps. I sat at the table, half a bowl of cereal going soggy in front of me, and waited. He didn't make us wait long. Once he had the mug between his hands and a bit of color back in his cheeks, he took a breath and said, "They found a fella in the trash rack." Ma'am's hand flew to her mouth. "Jesus," she said. "Ow!" Jam-up alarms went off around 6:30. Dad said, "Thought it'd be a log or a sheep." Sent the boys out on the catwalk to clear it. They come back up, Jerry's white as a sheet. Says there's a man stuck in the bars. Head first. He paused to sip his tea, stared into the steam. "Been under a while, the pathologist reckons," he went on. "Couple of weeks. Maybe since the worst of the rain. Came down the river, got pulled into the intake. Lucky he didn't go straight through to the turbine. Or we'd be picking bits of him out for weeks." My stomach turned. The cereal in the bowl went from unappetizing to impossible. "Did you know him?" Ma'am asked quietly. Dad shook his head. "Not personally," he said. "Local enough, though. Farm out by car. Fella name of Byrne. Patched his roof last summer, I think. One of the lads says he lost an arm in a thresher years back." The air left the room. Ma'am said something. "Lord have mercy, maybe," or "Jesus keep him," but I didn't hear the words. All I heard was the blood rushing in my ears, and underneath it, faint as breath against tile. Knock, knock, knock. I stood up so fast my chair scraped across the floor. "Jack," Ma'am said. "Where are you?" "Toilet," I muttered. My voice sounded wrong. "Just toilet." I shut the bathroom door, leaned over the sink, and stared at myself in the mirror. I looked normal. Bit pale. Freckles standing out. Hair flopping over my forehead in a way that was almost fashionable back in England. Less so here. There was nothing of river or death in my reflection. But my hands remembered the weight of the bag over my head, the drag of the water. My skin remembered the cold. My ears remembered the knocking, moving with me through the flood, not getting closer or further away. Just there. Burn, Dad had said. Lost an arm. Caught in the turbine trash rack weeks later. Maybe there'd been something wrong with the dates. Maybe he'd gone missing before the flood, slipped into the river somewhere further up, and the whole thing was coincidence. Or maybe I'd seen him as he was being carried down, had watched the last moments of his slow journey to the dam, his bloated body pinned for a while, in some eddy near the bridge before the current took him again. That's almost comforting when I tell it like that. Like what I saw was just physics and bad luck and anatomy. The problem is the trash racks are behind the gates. You don't get river trash or men into them unless the gates are open. And Dad had been very clear. The extra gate, the one nearest our estate, had only opened when things got desperate. First time in decades, he'd said. Never thought I'd see it. I'd been in the water before that. Still, I clung to the rational version. I had to. The alternative, that the thing I'd seen had been waiting, standing in a place a live man couldn't stand, watching me walk through his reach without quite touching, would have turned my head inside out. I told myself a story. I'd seen a dead man in a flood. That was horrible enough. The brain does weird shit when it sees horrible things. It adds details that aren't there. It invents a left sleeve tied in a knot when there's just a folded bit of cloth. It makes knocking noises in pipes sound like they're following you. I told myself that story for years. I left that town the second I could. Went to college in Galway for a bit, dropped out after a year, ended up in technical training. You go where the work is when you're from there. The big money, relatively speaking, is offshore. So that's where I went. North Sea rigs at first, then a stint in the Norwegian sector. Older now, a bit less stupid, a bit more in love with things that float and sink and spin than I'd ever admit back when I was 16. You spend enough time around water, you start to understand it in a way that's half science, half superstition. The sea out there isn't like the harbor back home. It's not brown and small and edged with familiar walls. It's black and endless and loud. Even on a calm day, you can feel it humming through the legs of the platform, a constant subterranean vibration. The first time I flew out in a chopper and saw the rig rise up out of the haze, I thought of the dam. Concrete there, steel here, but the same basic idea. Humans building something tall and intricate on the edge of something deep and inscrutable, then hoping it doesn't decide to shrug. On the rig, everything is wet in a different way. Not the soaking damp of perpetual rain, but a thin, salty film that gets into every hinge and seal. The metal sweats. The paint flakes. Pipes carry water, oil, gas, all under pressure. Pumps hum. Valves hiss. And always, under it all, knocking. Not ghost knocking. I mean the normal stuff. Waves hitting the legs, bits of debris getting driven against braces, shackles rattling in wind. Your first week out, every sound makes you jump. By the end of your first year, you barely notice unless the pattern changes. That's the key. It's not the noise, it's the pattern. You learn to tell the difference between wave slap and something solid, between the far-off clang of a cable and the close, sharp tick of thermal expansion in hot pipe. You know when someone's dropped a spanner 3 decks up and when a piece of the rig's own guts is trying to shake itself free. You also learn the unofficial stuff, the stories. Every installation has them. Blokes stepping out on the wrong side of sanity after too many 4-on, 4-off rotations. Shadows moving in empty stairwells. Footsteps on gratings when the night crew are all accounted for. Things brushing past ankles in seawater intake rooms, where the roar of the pumps hides everything else. Most of it's just boredom and isolation and the fact that humans weren't meant to live 50 meters above a freezing sea on a metal spider. But every now and then there's something that doesn't fit right. Something that sticks the way that face in the flood stuck. I didn't talk about Burn, about the one-armed man in the water. Not to the lads on the rig, not to ma'am on the phone on Sundays, Not to the occasional woman who put up with the smell of diesel in my clothes long enough to care. If anyone asked why I seemed more jumpy than most during storms, I blamed the dam. Said they'd had a bad near miss when I was a kid. Nearly lost a gate. Nearly lost my dad. Everyone understands that kind of story. The real one stayed where I'd left it, under a layer of mud and time, pressed up against an intake grill. Until the winter 3 years ago, when the sea decided to remind me. We were in the Norwegian sector then. Smaller rig, older, welded together at a time when people were still learning by trial and error. The company line was that it had been updated, refitted, made safe. The lads called it the tin can. Middle of December. Storm rolling in. You could feel it in the way the whole structure swayed, even before the waves got tall enough to hit the underside of the deck. The meteorologist said it would pass to the north. The old boys on the crew said the meteorologists were talking out of their arses, and this one was going to sit on us for a day and a night like an angry god. They were right. By midnight, the sea was a mess of black peaks with white scars. The wind sounded like a freight train made of knives. Every object that wasn't tied down was tied down. Every hatch that could be dogged shut was dogged shut. We'd suspended non-essential operations. No crane work, no oversight jobs, no nothing. Just keep the plant running, keep the power on, and hope nothing big decided to break. I'd drawn the short straw for one of the night shifts in the utility room. That's where we keep the seawater intakes, the fire pumps, the ballast controls, all the stuff that keeps the structure where it is and not listing like a dying cow. It's a horrible room in a storm. You're right down near the waterline, concrete and steel around, pipes like arteries overhead and underfoot. The intakes roar constantly, that deep, rushing sound of thousands of liters a minute being dragged in and sent off to cool engines or feed fire mains. If the hull takes a hit, you're one of the first to know. You're also one of the first to die, if it's bad. I was sitting on a plastic chair in front of the control panel, gauges twitching in the flicker of fluorescent lights, the occasional spray of rain somehow working its way through seals and hissing across the floor. The whole rig shook in sympathetic motion to the waves. The coffee in my mug rippled. Radio crackled now and then. Control up top asking for updates. Drillers complaining about motion. Nothing unusual for us. Sometime around 2 a.m., the noises changed. It was subtle at first, a slightly different tone in the intake roar. A new rattle in one of the valve manifolds. I frowned at the panel, checking pressures. Everything was in the green. No alarms. No illuminated red lights screaming for attention. Then came a knock. Knock, knock, knock. It was faint under everything else. My brain almost filed it under random shit. Bits of rig knock all the time. You get so used to it that you only really hear silence. But then it came again. Same rhythm. Same spacing. Knock, knock, knock. I put my mug down. The surface ripples distorted the fluorescent reflection. For a second, I was 16 again, standing chest deep in floodwater, rain in my eyes, cold up to my heart. I swallowed, rolled my shoulders, and told myself not to be a child. Probably something caught in the strainer, I muttered. Bit of debris. It's a fucking storm. I stood up anyway. You can feel sound through steel. You don't even need to put your ear to it. It comes up through your boots, through the soles of your feet. That's how I knew the knocking wasn't somewhere distant. It was close. The utility room is long, a maze of pipe runs and tanks. On one bulkhead, 6 big intake pipes come through from the hull, elbowing up into pumps. Each has its own strainer basket and isolation valve. The metal there is thicker than elsewhere, designed to cope with the pressure of the sea trying to rush in. I walked over, my steps echoing weirdly in the intermittent light. The storm made the whole room creak and groan. To anyone else, the knocks would have just been more of the same. Standing there, though, right in front of the intakes, it was impossible to ignore. Knock, knock, knock. The bulkhead vibrated under my hand. I leaned closer, breath held, putting my ear against the cold paint. The roar of water filled my head, a continuous, indifferent thunder. Underneath it, regular as a metronome that knocks. Not random, not the irregular clatter of something loose. It was like someone was hitting the outside of the hull with the base of a fist. 3 times, over and over. "Jack, you daft bastard," I whispered to myself. "It's nothing. It's nothing. I could have left it. I should have left it. Logged it. Maybe as unusual intake noise during storm to be investigated when sea state permits." No one would have blinked. Instead, I went and got my wrench. There's a small inspection port on each intake line, upstream of the pump, where you can crack it open and look at the strainer basket to see if it's clogged. You're not supposed to mess with them during a storm unless you have a damn good reason. Flood risk, pressure surges, you name it. But I convinced myself I did. I shut down the nearest pump, watched the indicator drop, closed the isolation valve with a squeal of reluctant metal. The roar in that line faded. The other 5 kept going, masking the worst of the silence. Knock, knock, knock. Now I was just in that one section of steel in front of me. Probably a bit of rope, I muttered. Bit of net. You'll open it, pull it out, and it'll be fine, and you'll sleep, and you'll feel like a dick for thinking otherwise. My hand shook as I loosened the bolts on the inspection hatch. Spray hissed out as the seal broke, fine and salty, like the rig was exhaling. I backed off half a turn, waited to make sure the pressure was equalized, then swung the hatch open. Cold air hit me in the face, smelling of deep, mineral water and something else underneath. Not rot exactly, not oil, something stale, like a room that's been shut up too long. I lifted the flashlight, angled it into the opening. The strainer basket was there, a metal cage designed to catch big bits before they hit the pump. It was clear. No hopi, no nech, no plashki begi vrapi cheeked. Beyond it, blackness. The pipe curved down through the hull and into the sea. You never see the water in there. It's just dark. Except this time, there was something between the bars. Something pale. At first, I thought it was a bit of torn plastic. A scrap of white sack. It fluttered slightly in the flow, too regular to be random. Then the plastic twitched, and I saw the nail. It was a finger, just the last knuckle of one, fingertip pressed against the inside of the strainer, nail blanched from pressure. It tapped. Knock, knock, knock. The sound transmitted through the steel, through my bones. The finger didn't look like a finger from a body that had been in the sea long. It was pale, yeah, but not chewed, not ragged. The nail was intact. The skin had that strange stretch quality, like someone had blown it up from underneath. My stomach lurched. The world narrowed to a spot of light in a circle of black. I staggered back, nearly tripping over my own feet, slammed the hatch shut, and cranked the bolts down with a speed that would have got me yelled at in training. When the last one bit, I leaned my forehead against the metal, breathing hard. The knocking continued. Knock, knock, knock. Now a little more muffled. Now filtered through the plate, but still there. Still steady. The radio on my belt crackled. Utility, this is control, a voice said, distorted through weather and interference. You picking up any vibration down there? We're seeing some noise on the seabed sensors. I swallowed, thumbed the transmit button. Utility here, I said. My voice sounded almost normal. I was proud of it. Yeah, getting some knocking on intake 1. Probably debris. I've isolated the pump, had a look. Strainer's clear, but something's hitting the hull. Nothing serious so far. There was a pause. Copy that, Control said. Well, we've got something. Seabed scopes picking up intermittent contact about 10 meters off leg B. Could be a stray container. Could be fuck knows. All I know is it's deep. We've no ROVs out in this shit. Keep an ear on it. Shout if it changes. Will do, I said. The radio clicked off. I stood there by intake 1, the hatch still warm under my forehead from my hands, and did the calculation. 10 meters off the leg. That put whatever they were hearing well below the surface. The tin can sat in a couple of 100 meters of water, give or take. 10 meters off the leg isn't someone's drop toolbox. It's something big enough and solid enough to show up on vibrations through the steel. You get debris in storms, containers washed off ships, bits of platform from God knows where. You don't get people, Not at that depth. Not tapping on holes like they're at your front door. Knock, knock, knock. Stop. I whispered to the metal. Just stop. It didn't. The rest of the shift felt endless. I restarted the pump because leaving it off would have raised questions, and I didn't want anyone else opening that hatch. Whatever was on the outside could stay there. The knocking stayed too. It didn't speed up. It didn't slow down. It didn't move up or down the frequency range. It was as if whoever was doing it was very patient, as if they had waited a long time once and had learned how to wait again. When my relief came on at 6, a skinny lad from Cork with more tattoos than experience, I nearly crushed him in my rush to get out of the room. All quiet? He asked, glancing at the panel. Yeah, I lied. Bit of store noise on intake 1, but control knows. Nothing doing. Shout if you get any alarms. He nodded, more interested in his own coffee than in my face. I didn't blame him. Up in the accommodation block, the storm beat against the windows like a giant trying to get in. The corridor smelled of damp overalls and sweat. I peeled out of my gear, lay on my bunk, and stared at the underside of the one above me. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that finger tapping against steel. Every time the rig shook, I tensed, waiting for the rhythm. At some point between waking and sleep, I drifted. In the dream, I wasn't on the rig. I was back on the road above the harbor, water up to my chest, ash tree on my left. The flood smelled the way it had then, mud and slurry in Old Lake. You're late, a voice said behind me. Not angry, matter of fact. I kept walking. The water got deeper instead of shallower. Over my shoulders now, up to my mouth. The bag over my head dissolved into foam. Knock, knock, knock. When I turned in the dream, the man stood there again, exactly as he had years before. Bloated, coat floating around him, one sleeve tied in a bulging knot. Only this time, he wasn't far away. He was close, an arm's length. His face had more detail than my 16-year-old eyes had managed. The skin was gray-white, stretched, lips pushed out, eyes a bit too round. There was something wrong with his neck, like it had swollen all the way round and his head had sunk down into it. He smiled. It cracked the skin in little lines. Took you long enough to get back to the water, he said. I woke up with my hands clawing at my own throat. The storm eased by the afternoon. By the time the next night's shift rolled round, the sea had gone from homicidal to merely indifferent. Debris still knocked against the legs now and then, but the rig's motion smoothed out. People's shoulders relaxed. In the utility room, the panel looked the same. The intake roar sounded the same. The knocking was gone. I checked every hatch anyway, ran my hands over every section of bulkhead, stood in front of intake 1 with my eyes closed, listening so hard my ears hurt. Nothing. I logged unusual noise, weather-related. No action required, and tried to get on with my job. On the flight back to shore at the end of the rotation, I watched the rig shrink to a dot and thought about trash racks and strainer baskets and how easy it is for things to get stuck where they don't belong. I told myself, again, that I was being ridiculous, that the flood, the man, the dead farmer, the finger in the pipe, the sonar readings, they were all separate things. My brain was just stringing them together because that's what brains do, especially when you grow up in a place where everyone has a story about something in the water. Then I went home for my time off and walked down to the harbor the first day like I always did. The river looked smaller than I remembered. It always does now. The quay wall still had the stain from that winter, a faint brown line a meter above normal high tide, like the town had a tide mark of its own. They'd raised the road a bit near the bend since I was a kid, added more drains, reinforced the bridge. Dad said the dam had new protocols now, less chance of another once-in-a-century flood, even though we'd had 3 since. I didn't walk the upper road to the ash tree. I could have. The sun was out, the field soggy but not underwater. It would have been easy. Instead, I stayed on the harbor wall, hands on the cold stone, looking down at where river met tide. The water, there is always restless, pushing and pulling at itself in confusion. Near one of the mooring rings, where green weed feathered in the current, there was a patch of deeper shadow. Or that's what I thought until it moved. A shape rose towards the surface, just enough to catch the light. Pale, rounded, not all of it, not enough to see form, just the impression of something swollen. My fingers dug into the stone. Salt bit the chewed skin around my nails. The shape brushed the underside of the surface, distorting it into a bulge, then sank again. The only sound was the slap of little waves against the wall, and behind me, the clank of a mast on a moored boat. "You all right there, Jack?" I jumped. O'Reilly stood a few feet away, older, a bit thicker around the middle, uniform jacket undone. He'd gone gray at the temples. The last time I'd seen him, he'd been telling me to go home by tractor. The look on his face when I turned on the bridge had never made it into any of my adult conversations. "Yeah," I said. "Yeah, fine. Just looking." He followed my gaze to the water. "Never changes, does it?" he said. "Comes up, goes down. Takes what it wants in between." There was a beat. "You heard about Byrne?" he added. My throat felt dry. "Heard he ended up in the dam," I said carefully. O'Reilly made a face. "Aye, nasty business." He rubbed his nose with a thumb. "Family never settled after. Wife moved away. Kids don't come back. Can't blame them. Every time it rains, everyone looks at the river and thinks of him." "Bit late now," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "Rains everywhere." He snorted. Then he looked at me properly, the way he had that day by the bridge, like he was seeing more than just a lad on the quay. "You were out then, weren't ye?" he asked. "That flood went round the back way." My skin prickled. "Yeah," I said. "Stupid, I know. Nearly had my head chewed off over that," he said, "but there was no heat in it. You were lucky. Another foot on it, and we'd be pulling you out of a ditch." He paused. "You see anything out there?" he added casually. Too casually. The sensible answer would have been no. Laugh it off. Say it was just water and muck and fence posts. I opened my mouth to say exactly that. "Yeah," I said instead. There was a man, out in the middle. Coat, one arm. He looked wrong. "O'Reilly's yav tightened." "I thought so," he said softly. "What?" I said. My heart thumped. "What do you mean you thought so?" He looked out at the river, not at me. "Call out before the dam. Before the body," he said. Couple days after the big rain. Woman swore blind she saw someone standing in the flooded field by the marsh, watching the road. Nothing between him and the main channel. No way to get there without a boat. We went out, had a look. Found fuck all. Chalked it up to stress. He shot me a sideways glance. "You're the third person to mention a one-armed man and all that," he said. "No names. No faces. Just shape." The wind off the water was cold and smelled of weed. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked. "To who?" He shrugged. "The papers? Guard sees ghost and flood. No thanks. I like my job, and I like knowing what I did and didn't see." He tapped the quay wall with his knuckles. "I know this much," he said. "Some people go quick in the water. Some take their time, and some get stuck. Caught in gates, in grates on rocks. You can drag a body out of a river. Doesn't mean you've got all of it." There wasn't much to say to that. We stood there a minute longer, watching the current curl round the harbor steps. A bit of rubbish, plastic probably, hit the wall with a soft, hollow sound. "Knock, knock, knock. Already flinched." So did I. He gave a little laugh, brittle as old paint. "Jesus, listen to us," he said, jumping at bottles. "You think we were kids?" "I was a kid," I said quietly. He nodded. "Ah," he said, "and now you're not." That was the last proper conversation I had with him. He retired not long after. Moved inland, someone said, away from the sea, away from the river, away from anything that could swell and rise and reach up the way it had that winter. I kept going back offshore. What else was I going to do? The money was good. The work made a certain selfish sense, putting your skills between deep water and whatever humans had decided to build on at this time. But I started to notice the pattern. It wasn't every storm. It wasn't every rig. Just sometimes in certain places during certain weather, the knocks would start. Always in threes. Sometimes against an intake. Sometimes against a leg. Once, memorably, on a ship's hull, in the middle of a perfectly calm transit between two platforms. That last one was on a supply vessel 3 years after the Tin Can incident. We were halfway between installations, 30 miles from any shoreline, depth under keel, something ridiculous. The sea was glass. The sky was a low white lid. I was standing at the stern, smoking, watching the ship's wake draw 2 white lines back into infinity. The engine's thrumming came up through my boots. The air tasted like diesel and salt. The knock came from right under my feet. Knock, knock, knock. I stamped instinctively, as if I could stand back. It came again, a fraction to the left this time. Knock, knock, knock. I ground the cigarette out on the railing, pitched the butt into the water, and went back inside. I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? Something's knocking on the ship at 200 meters depth. Lads, better get your ghost nets out. Instead, I did what everyone does in this business with the things we can't explain. I wrote it up as unidentified contact, likely debris, in a log no one would ever read properly, and I pushed it down. You can only push so much down. Last year, we did a short contract on an experimental listening station. Underwater this time. Not me personally, obviously, I'm not a saturation diver. But we were topside support for a crew that were building and maintaining these modules on the seabed, full of hydrophones and sensors, and all the kit you need if you want to hear whales or submarines, or whatever else moves in the deep. The modules were like little underwater caravans, anchored to the bottom with thick cables running up to a buoy and then to us. The divers would go down, crawl inside, fix whatever needed fixing, then come back up along fixed lines. Safe enough, on paper. I sat in the surface control room most days, watching depth readings and time charts, listening to divers breathe through headsets. You get used to the sound of someone else's lungs that way. In, out, little grunts when they move. The occasional swear when they bang a shoulder on a frame. One evening, during a long dive, I heard a familiar rhythm in the background noise. Not the breathing, not the hiss of gas. Something coming through the diver's suit, through the hull of the module, through the water itself. Knock, knock, knock. The diver paused. You hear that, he said, voice thinned by depth. I pressed my own headset tighter. What are you picking up? I asked, keeping my tone level. On the wall, he said. Someone's knocking on the wall. One of your jokers fucking around with a hammer topside. I looked at the other techs in the control room. They looked at me. No one was anywhere near a hammer. Negative, I said. No external activity scheduled. Describe direction. He shifted. Feels like everywhere, he said finally. Comes right through. 3 taps. As if on cue. Knock, knock, knock. The other techs stiffened. They heard it now, riding on the line like an unwanted caller. The station was 300 meters down. No current strong enough to throw big debris around at that depth, not with the weather we had. The sensors on our display showed nothing larger than small fish coming near the structure. Keep your head, I told the diver. Could be thermal expansion. Could be anything. Yet, he said. Sure. His breathing picked up a little. Only someone who'd listened to men breathe underwater for years would have heard it. Get your job done, then we'll bring you up, I added. You're at 2 hours 14. No sense in calling it early if it's just some arsehole sea dog with a sense of humor. He laughed, which was what I wanted. The knock came again, softer this time. Afterwards, when he was back on deck, face creased round the eyes from the mask, he cornered me by the dive shack. You ever heard that before? He asked. That knocking. Rigs are full of noises, I said. You know that. He shook his head, water still dripping from his hair onto his shoulders. Not like that, he said. Felt deliberate. He didn't say anything about ghosts. Divers are a superstitious lot, but they're also professionals. Admit you're hearing things that aren't there. You might find yourself on the beach instead of the boat. I could have told him about a flood on a country road and a man with one arm standing where the depth shouldn't have let him. I could have told him about a finger at a strainer basket, about sonar hits 10 meters off a leg, about an old guard on a quay wall saying some people don't come out all the way. Instead, I said, there's things out there we don't understand, and left it at that. That's what it comes down to in the end. People like to think water is just another environment. Sure, it's dangerous, But if you throw enough calculation and concrete and steel at it, it behaves. You can dam it, pump it, sail on it, pipe it to cities. You can turn it into power, into profit. But water remembers. It remembers shapes that have moved through it. It remembers bodies. It remembers desperation. It finds new paths through old scars. Sometimes, if you're unlucky or stupid or both, it remembers you. These days, I work as a maintenance supervisor on another rig, different sector, same sea. I'm the one telling kids not to panic when pipes rattle and bulkheads creak. I'm the one saying, that's just the sea talking, lad. She's loud, but she's not out to get you specifically. I mean it most of the time. But when the weather's bad and I'm walking the lower decks alone, torch beams slicing through spray, I'll put my hand on the steel and feel for anything that doesn't fit. Any rhythm that cuts across the random chaos. Knock, knock, knock. That's the one that makes me stop. That's the one that gets into my teeth. I know he's not burned, not anymore. Whatever was left to burn went through the dam years ago, got minced and scattered in a plume of silt and weed. You don't stay yourself after that. What's left is something shaped by water and gates and narrow places. Something that knows the feel of bars and steel and pressure, that knows the point where concrete ends and the deep begins. Something that's learned how to move along the veins we've put into the sea. Intakes, outfalls, ballast tanks, flooded legs, listening stations. Maybe it needs someone to see it now and then. Maybe it needs someone to hear the knock and know what it means. You're late. I don't go out of my way to oblige. I don't walk into floods anymore. I don't open hatches I don't have to. When I'm home and the rain's battering the windows and the drains in the street are overwhelmed and water's sheeting down the hill towards the harbor, I stay inside. I drink tea. I pretend I can't hear the faint tapping in the radiators. But sometimes when I'm walking down a corridor and the lights flicker just right and the smell of wet steel is strong in my nose, I'll hear it close as breath. Knock, knock, knock. I stop. I put my fingers on the wall. I feel the vibration come up through my bones. I never knock back. Not because I'm brave. Not because I'm convinced that if I answer, he'll come in. It's simpler than that. He's been waiting in the dark spaces between river and sea for longer than I've been alive. He knows the routes. He knows the depths. If you want to find me, he will. He remembers where I was the first time he saw me. Waist deep on a drowned road. Bag over my head. Trying to get home. He remembers the dam. The gates. The blades. He remembers the sound of his own hand on steel over and over while the water took him. So when the knocks come, I listen. I keep my hand on the metal until they fade. I tell myself they're just waves, just debris, just thermal expansion. And if, in the small hours with the storm outside and the hull shuddering and the pipes alive with things that aren't air or water, I find myself whispering, I'm here, into the dark that's between me and whatever's on the other side. You put your ear to steel in a storm, you learn to tell the difference between waves and something that's knocking back at you. I learned it waist deep in a flood on a November afternoon, with a drowned village up the river and a dam straining against more water than it wanted. I've been hearing the knock ever since.